Okay, we're back. I couldn't get a remote control, so I'm just going to say slide each time I want to change it. So I'm going to be talking about the shift in relationships between corporations and consumers, the brandscape, the relationship between brands and the end users, and how that's changed in the last few years. So I'm going to be talking about why it's changed, how it's changed, and what the hell you do about it in this new complicated world. So I'm the author of a book called Punk Marketing. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm also an author of a book called The Business Playground about creativity. And what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 or 15 minutes spans both of those topics because they're, as you probably imagine, they're intimately related. So when I first started working in ad agencies, I worked in some big London ad agencies, and then I worked at Coca-Cola so that was 10 years ago. TV was king. It was all about big broadcast mass media advertising. And if you had the budgets to do it, that was what you did. And other things like viral, guerrilla, experiential, all those funky new things, you'd only use if you didn't have the money to use the mass communication stuff. And that really continued up until the early 2000s. I was working in an ad agency called Crispin Porter Bogusky, which I was running in Los Angeles, where I live now, and it was really that agency was a specialist in the non-traditional stuff. We'd do TV, but really we were at the forefront of doing digital and other sorts of work. And we worked with small clients who couldn't afford anything else, primarily. But I noticed a shift in about 2002, 2003, where we started getting calls from some of the big advertisers like Unilever and General Mills and Procter & Gamble, who said, what you're doing seems to be very interesting. You seem to be getting some interesting results. And there was a bit of a shift, a move for some of the money into non-traditional formats. So what happened? What's led to that change? And if you look now, 7 years later from that first sort of beginning of the change, that agency is now names amongst its clients Volkswagen, Microsoft, Burger King. Some of the biggest advertisers have now turned towards that way of doing things, and they're really seen at the forefront of that sort of branding and advertising. So I think there are 5 influences that have led to this change. The first one is media fragmentation. If you can try next slide, please. So if you look at about sort of 10, 15 years ago, there are very few media choices. Your media plan looks something like this, where TV was going to be at the top of it, and in the US you've got cable TV and network TV. In other markets you might just have TV, and then there'll be some other bits and pieces. And about 10 or 12 years ago, you could reach 80% of 18 to 49-year-old women with 3 TV spots. You could show one ad 3 times, and you'd reach 80% of that audience. 5 years later, you'd have to run the same spot 97 times. So that just shows people are consuming a particular media less and less and less, or a particular channel of that media less and less and less. So if you look at, next slide, please. If you look at the situation, so next one. So if you look at the situation now, you'll see the sort of growth of people's use of media on a weekly basis, and some of this projects up until 2020. And you'll see that TV, analog, and digital plays a big role and continuing to big role. And if you look at the figures, people still watch just as much as TV as they ever did. But you'll see this sort of creep of other types of media, not least of all is the internet, which is sort of a big rise from the early 2000s. So if you look at the hub now, next slide, please. It looks something like that. There's tons and tons and tons of different things, of choices of ways to reach people. And, of course, this is just a small selection of them. You could put a ton of other things on there as well. And, some of those things are huge, like Facebook and Twitter. MySpace losing in significance. There are some things that are still a little bit low-key. I was looking at the stats of Second Life today. Everyone remember Second Life? 3 years ago, it was the next big thing, which carried on for about a year. And then if you look at the figures and audience figures now, it's really, really dropped off. So that was one of those blips. I don't think the same could be said of Twitter and Facebook, but I'm sure there are many other media we're looking at now and thinking, is that it? Is that the next big thing? Is that the one I should be putting my money towards? Or is something else coming along? So the first influence on this changing relationship is media fragmentation. And a new media format, as I say, is being created pretty much every day. So the next one is, next slide, please. And by the way, even if you can reach somebody through one of these media, the chances are that they're doing something else at the same time. As I see, many of the people are in this audience, computers, mobile phones, checking messages, and this is what's known as continuous partial attention, CPA, which is actually, I think, a big problem now, is that people find it very difficult to be focused on one thing. So 58% of people watching TV are also surfing the internet. And if you talk to teenagers, many of them, 2/3 of teenagers, instant message their friends when they're in the same room as them. So this, it's going on, it continues and continues where you use many different media at the same time. So if you can reach somebody through some form of media, the chances are you've only got half their attention. So it's got to be bloody good in order to get their attention. So next slide, please. So the second sort of influence in this changing brandscape, if the first one is media fragmentation, is there's just so many brands. I mean, if you go around to a supermarket and look at toothpastes, just for instance, there's 26 varieties of Colgate, and there's the same number of varieties of Crest. And all of them have got tiny differences which sort of supposedly fill a market cavity, excuse the pun, or market gap, but actually there are very, very little differences between them. And if you look at studies, psychology studies of the way consumers behave when they see too much choice, is that, well, they might initially be attracted towards that choice and like to sample them. When it comes to buying products, if they have too many undifferentiated choices, they're less likely to buy any product at all. They'll walk away. And they've done studies on this in supermarkets where they lay out 24 different varieties of chocolate, and people will stop and sample them. But actually, compared to when you just have 6 chocolate varieties on display, while fewer people will sample them, more people will buy if there's fewer. So we have all these brands with little to choose from, and people end up being confused. It's what Alvin Toffler, in his book Future Shock in 1970, called overchoice, too much stuff in our lives. Next slide, please. So the downside of this inundation of too many products and brands is that we are inundated with marketing messages. For every new brand and product, we need new marketing. So next slide. So it means that from everywhere we go, there are marketing messages. It's very, very difficult to determine how many messages people see on an average basis. I've seen figures of hundreds or thousands. It's very difficult to work that out. But what we do know is that if you just take the US market, $600 billion is spent on marketing every year. And we know there are 300 million consumers. So $2,000 per person on marketing every single year. And I, for one, want my money back. It's like it's a waste of money. There's too many messages for too many undifferentiated products. So the third influence is that too much marketing, white noise. Next slide, please. And so marketers are trying to get us wherever we go, even the toilets, even the restrooms. There's advertising opportunities in every single place. It's difficult to avoid them. And where in markets like the US in particular, there's few regulations in terms of what's allowed and how many ads you're allowed, for instance, in an hour of TV time. There's just so much stuff that in the end people get pissed off with it and want to turn away from it. Next slide, please. So there's 2 more factors. One is the lack of trust in corporations. So the fourth factor in this changing relationship is that people don't trust corporations anymore. In fact, only 2% of people really trust CEOs of companies, which means that 98% of people don't trust them that much. And that's not surprising. You look at scandals like Enron and what happened with Bernie Madoff. And it's not surprising also that marketing people there's very poor trust of marketing people. So people trust peer-to-peer recommendations 10 percentage points more than they trust ads, even if it's from strangers. So 33% of people will trust a peer-to-peer recommendation on the internet, whereas 20-something% of people trust recommendations from ads and marketing. So there isn't a lot of trust there. So the last factor is technology. And this is what a large part of this conference is about. And that's really the how things are changing. So those first four factors are why things are changing: fragmentation, too many brands, too much marketing, and lack of trust in corporations. The way that how it's changing is through technology. And what we found in the last 10, 15 years is power has been handed to consumers. And a a lot of blame for this has been put, certainly in the US, on DVR devices, digital video recorders. And TiVo in the early 2000s, which is the sort of big brand leader in DVRs, certainly in the US, foolishly published these figures which showed that people skipped ads when they had a DVR. I guess foolishly because nobody had maybe thought about it or they were hiding behind that truth before, but if you can look way back to the remote control device, which was actually launched in the early 50s, and it first became really prominent in mid-1980s. So in 1985, more homes had a TV remote control device than homes that didn't. So for the first time, people were able to change from one form of content to another without leaving their sofas, without leaving their couches. They could, if they didn't like the ad, they could switch over. Before that, people would be prepared to accept the advertising and marketing because there was this relationship of, I know I have to watch this stuff in order to get my free content. With the remote control device, that changed, which is, here is the power to shift this stuff over. So technology has really, is about changing to switching things that you're not engaged with anymore to things that you want to do instead. And that's changed the bar. It's changed the barrier in terms of what marketing and advertising needs to do in order to compete with the content that it surrounds. And I think part of the problem with what's happened in the last few years is that some of the major forms of media, TV in particular, have been thrown out by many people as it doesn't work anymore. People are switching away from the ads. And to some extent that's true in that if you look at the figures of people who have digital video recorder devices, 6% of people never switch fast forward through the ads, which means 94% of people do or sometimes do, which is a huge number. So not surprisingly, many marketing organizations are saying, well, let's move away from TV because we're not getting an engaged audience. But it's not, TV advertising is not the problem. The problem is bad advertising. I think we dumb down messages. We try and treat everybody one size fits all. And as David Ogilvy famously said, the consumer is not a moron, she's your wife. And actually, there's some examples of really great ads. We saw a couple of Philips ones in the last sessions, which were online ads. I'm going to show you 3 ads now, which I just like. They came from the last year or so. Another one is a Philips ad, by the way, which is the predecessor to the previous campaign. And there's 2 other ones. You've probably seen them many times before, but I thought it's just worth reminding ourselves that actually when advertising is good, TV advertising is good, it's really good. So if you could show those 3 YouTube films, please. What a great way to demonstrate speed of a car without saying that. I saw it creeping over from the left. There it is. Has everyone seen this ad? This Philips carousel ad?